it looks like we're going to be able to go live on Facebook today, which is good. Let me check if it's working. Okay, we're live on Facebook. Good morning, everyone. Happy Sunday. Today is April 19th, 2020. How are you guys doing? I hope you're doing well with the pandemic and everything going on. Are you guys live with me? Can you all hear me well? Can I get a confirmation before we get started?
Yes, Arjun, we can hear you. Yeah.
And I find that you guys are doing well. And again, these interactions, these training sessions are supposed to be interactive. So please, if and when you have questions, please stop us.
Sure.
Awesome. And then today, we'll be presenting Jeet Singh and myself. We'll be presenting the roles of a business analyst and then the BA toolkit from tools that you typically will be using as a BA. So that's what we'll cover today. Let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. Okay, you guys all get ready to get started? We have lots to cover today, so that's why I'm just going right into this. Again, as I mentioned in the Business Analyst Success Path, this is where we're going to be going live, and the training video will be when and if you have questions to go back and watch this training at a later time frame. I'm doing this training with Jeet Singh, who's on with us, and again, we do free live training for business analysts each week, Sundays. And we are going to be kicking off a live project. More details to come around that on the scope of the project and the timelines. But once those are finalized, we'll be happy to share them with you. So with that, let's get started. So to make sure that we have enough time to cover everything that we need. And again, as I said before, these are supposed to be interactive. So if you have any questions, please stop us while we're going through the materials. So with that, intro to a BA role. This is, I'm sure if you're an aspiring business analyst or a business analyst already, you've seen some sort of cartoons around what the business analyst role is like. This is just one of those. And what this showcases is, kind of what the role of a business analyst is and what happens if you're not gathering requirements appropriately and working with your stakeholders and things like that. So I'll quickly go over this, but again, it's supposed to be just a funny diagram to show you the context of the business analyst role, right? So in the beginning, this is how the customer explained they wanted the project. This is what the project manager understood. This is how the analyst designed it. This is how the programmer wrote it out. Again, because the requirements were not clear, they weren't documented appropriately, and of course, they weren't programmed appropriately. And this is what the business consultant presented. This is how the project was documented. As you can see, barely nothing. And then this is how operations installed it. And this is how the customer was billed for like a fancy little thing that, didn't have anything. And then this is how the solution was supported. And this is what the customer really wanted. So again, what this diagram shows you is that there's lots of miscommunications that happen typically on projects if there's not clear and concise communication between business analysts and their stakeholders and the project team. So again, just a funny diagram just to showcase that, in the business analyst realm, there's lots of chances for error. And that's why a lot of the things that we talk about are so important, so we can avoid these types of situations. Okay, let's move on. Okay, excuse me. So this is my favorite diagram that explains the role of a business analyst. I took this from somewhere, I believe somewhere on the internet. And what this does is, the reason I like it is because it shows how the business analysts are really the middlemen in any organization, in between the business teams and the IT teams. So what this shows us is that as a business analyst, right, you're working with the business teams to identify the business needs. They're talking to you about what those needs are. And then you're talking to the IT teams and helping to create the detailed requirements. The IT teams create a solution. And then that business analyst brings it back to the business teams to validate the solution. So as you can see, the left-hand side talks about what the business teams are responsible for. The right-hand side talks about what the IT teams are responsible for. And you see in here that the solution is defined by our IT teams, right? Oftentimes as business analysts and as the business wants to take leadership on defining exactly how things should be done, it is really the role of our IT teams to define that solution, because they're hired into those roles because of the caliber and expertise that they showcase. So our role as a business analyst is to be that middle person and working with the business to identify those business needs, and then working with our IT folks and giving them the opportunity to define what that solution needs to be based on the business needs, and then validating that solution for our end users to make sure that the solution that we have identified meets their business needs. So I'll pause right here to see if there's any questions. Okay, so let's move on. So when we're looking at the business analyst role, you're working from our standpoint. There are business analysts that support many different industries. For our standpoint, we're working with or talking about or training business analysts for IT projects, IT systems. So I thought it would be helpful for everybody to get a very, very high level picture of how IT applications and systems work, right? So this is a 3-tier architecture. There's an N-tier architecture as well, meaning that there's many different nodes similar to this for applications or systems that you may be working on. But if you get the basic understanding of what the systems look like, I think that you'll have, I think you'll have an easier time understanding kind of what your role is. So you see databases at the bottom. This is called the database layer. You see the application server over here. This is called your logical layer. And then on the top, you see the desktop, laptop, workstation. This is your presentation layer. So most of the time when you're working with your business analyst, they're giving you requirements, right? From a presentation layer standpoint, meaning they're giving you requirements on what they need to see on the screen or what needs to happen. When you're capturing requirements, you need to make sure you're capturing them at the logical layer, right? Because what you're trying to accomplish is, how are you going to pull data from systems? How does it need to work? What calculations need to happen? What validations need to happen at the logical layer before it gets presented to our stakeholders? So this is a very, very basic. And again, I'm not very tech savvy. I manage businesses, I manage projects from a business analyst and project management standpoint, but having this diagram and understanding it really does help me figure out when business stakeholders are requesting requirements or talking about things that they want, which of the 3 are they talking about, and how do I need to format that into my requirements? Okay, any questions? Okay, so what are the desired? Was there a question?
Yeah, there is a question.
Yep.
I just wanted to know if somebody is trying to get a job of a business analyst who is non-IT person, does he need to have knowledge of any programming language?
No, and I'll say this from my standpoint. I know that in India, they require business analysts to have an IT background or knowledge of programming languages. But in the traditional business analyst role, you are not supposed to have knowledge of a programming language, right? Your role is, as we mentioned over here, is to work on this side of the field with business teams and making sure you're capturing those business needs and documenting them appropriate so that the IT teams, that means that the your architects, your programmers, your business systems analysts can convert the business needs into the detailed technical requirements and identify a solution.
Okay. Okay.
In India, I believe what they do is they merge the business analyst role with the business systems analyst role, which means that you should be a little bit more technical, but I don't think that you're required to know a programming language.
So because I have been to I have attended one interview. They were asking me, do you have a knowledge of SQL and can you fire SQL queries? So that is the reason I wanted to ask you.
Right. And I'll jump in on that one. So a lot of companies do look for analysts that have SQL backgrounds just because there's a lot of data manipulation that happens. So if we go to the next slide, so go back one to the diagram. So if you're looking on the screen, you have 3-tier architecture. A lot of companies will refer this to front end, middleware, and back end. So what they're looking for when they're looking for analysts that have SQL background or know how to fire queries is they want to know if you can extract the data from the back end through the middleware and show it on the front end. Analysts typically do not need to know that. I personally am really bad with SQL. I know how to run basic queries and do basic joins, but that's because I learned it on the job working with developers, not because I knew it going into it. So as an analyst, it's not necessary for you to know because, again, it's in the title, Business Analyst. You are the representation of the business, not the back end. Unless you're an IT analyst that does data manipulation or you work for a data company, then it's understandable you have a programming background or you know SQL. But it's not a requirement for analysts. And then it also varies based on what company you're trying to get a job for. Companies like Google, their analysts know a lot of programming and coding in SQL because they're a tech company. But a company, let's say like Cisco, you might not need that because it's more of a business company. So it varies based on what company you're applying for, but it's not a requirement. And you can still be successful if you don't have a programming background.
I guess what we're saying is if you're seeing job requirements for business analysts and they're consistently requesting that you have SQL background, then try to learn that, right? It would never hurt you, but just understand for a business analyst role, it's traditionally being the middle person between the business and IT teams to make sure that you're capturing the requirements. Here, let's talk about this. It's to make sure that you're capturing the requirements appropriately and that you're communicating them with the business teams in a way that, communicating them with the IT teams in a way that will help them create an easy transition from the business to the IT solution. Does that help answer your question?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So what are the desired attributes of a business analyst? You should have great oral and written communication skills. You should have proactive with follow-up as needed, attention to detail, and ability to build relationships with cross-functional teams. And this is critical here, right? Let's just go over one at a time. So great oral and written communication skills. Majority of your job, right? So for business analysts, 60 to 70% of the time, they're working with stakeholders in meetings and identifying business requirements. And as you're doing that, you need to communicate, document those requirements. So that's why you have to have great written communication skills, right? You need to be proactive with follow-up as needed. Oftentimes in requirements gathering sessions, business stakeholders will say, I'm not 100% sure on this. I need to follow up with somebody and get back to you. And oftentimes they have their own full-time jobs and responsibilities and they forget. So you need to be proactive with follow-up as needed to go back to that stakeholder and say, hey, we talked about this and we didn't close the loop. Can we go back and talk about this? So that's where proactive follow-up is needed. Probably is at least 10% of your time, if not more. You always have to be proactive and make sure you're closing the loops as needed. Attention to detail, a lot of times you'll get requirements from different groups and there'll be conflicting requirements. Jeet, I see there's people in the chat. If you can check that out for us, please. Attention to detail. Again, this is oftentimes you'll find conflicting requirements from different groups. And you need to be able to catch them before they go to the IT guys, just so you can validate what those requirements need to be, right? And document them appropriately. And then the reason why I have in red the ability to build relationships with cross-functional teams, because as a business analyst, you'll be working with many different teams like accounting, marketing, product development, whatever, right? So you need to have the ability to build those relationships strong so that they're willing to help you understand and give you the time of the day so you can do your job appropriately. So really need to have good interpersonal skills as a business analyst. Sorry, this thing is getting stuck. Okay. So the types of projects you'll work on as a business analyst, there's really 3 types of projects. The first one is called off the shelf, which means that you're buying something for your enterprise. The second one is enhancing an existing application. And the third one is a new build. So let's go back over over the different types of projects that you'll have. So off the shelf means that you're purchasing a software or a service that already exists outside. So let's say, for example, Salesforce is a service that you would want to purchase. So if you're working on a off the shelf project, what you're going to be doing as a business analyst is you're going to be focusing on matching the internal needs to the external tools that are available in the market. Okay, you're going to be trying to document what your business needs are, again, as we do as a business analyst in any project. And then you're going to be looking for tools and applications that match those requirements so you can go ahead and purchase that. And again, purchasing is done through the procurement area, but first you need to identify what those products look like. The second one here is enhancements of existing application. This is a focus on, so when you're enhancing something that already exists, right, you're working to understand where the changes need to be. So your focus is going to be on business process modeling or re-engineering, meaning how are you going to make the system different and better than what it's doing today. So that's going to be your focus as a business analyst. And if we're building something scratch, like a whole new application, then your focus needs to be on the internal IT infrastructure for sustainability. Meaning, excuse me, if you're building a product, you need to understand who's going to build it from your internal IT teams, who's going to support it when it goes live, and the timelines and things like that, and the internal caliber of your programmers and your IT teams to actually build something from scratch for the business team. So those are the 3 types of projects in general that you'll be working on as a business analyst. Okay. Here's a project question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, sir. So a new build basically will focus on infrastructure sustainability, suitability. Is it the role of the project manager, like what infrastructure will be required, or it will be considered in the role of project like business analyst?
So typically, again, you as a business analyst, you'll start out with gathering those requirements. Typically, each project, when you start, you document the requirements. Once those requirements are, complete, at that time, leadership, could be the project manager, could be, working with leaders of the IT teams. You could be working with the leader of the team that's sponsoring the project to identify if we internally have the skill set to build this, or should we go out and buy this? So those are the types of discussions that are done after you're done capturing the requirements to understand which direction you want to go, right? So it's never the responsibility of one role, business analyst or PM or anybody. It's usually a collective a collective commitment to understand if we internally have the capabilities to build something, or do we want to just go out and buy something that already exists.
Okay. As part of IT infrastructure, we rely on resources and cost. This is also a part of when in the initial phase when the project is in the initial phase. Do even business analysts actively participate in this activity related to cost of the project and resources?
No, typically no. That's done at the PMO, project management office level, typically with project managers and all of that stuff. Typically not at the business analyst, but when what I wanted to do with this slide was to give you like a flavor of what type of projects you may be working on, right? And what the focus should be if you're working on these types of projects. But you're right, when projects have first come in, they're introduced, there's usually some sort of a feasibility study. Business analysts sometimes don't get involved. Depending on the organization, you could get involved in capturing the business requirements so that the project management office and everybody involved can have a better sense of scoping the project out from a cost and resource and timelines perspective.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any more questions here? Okay, so this is, I'm just doing a time check. It is 7:20 already, and I do want to give Jeet time at the end of this to talk about some of the tools that business analysts use. So let's try to go through this really quickly. This slide talks about the different organizations that you'll see as a business analyst. The first one on the left-hand side is a functional org structure, which means that that means that functional managers have all the power, right? So this is when an organization is managed by the functional manager, meaning, okay, so this is the product area manager, and this is a staff reporting to this person. This is marketing staff reporting to this person. Oops, sorry. And then when you're looking at the, so when you're looking at the project org structure here, the project managers typically have the power in the organization. But typically as business analysts, you will see that you work majority of the time in a matrix organization, which means that you have functional managers and you have project managers that are working with staff. So what this is saying is, as a project manager and a functional manager will have dotted line responsibilities to the team. So that means if we're working on a project that's cross-functional, you've heard me say this before, as a business analyst, you need to have the ability to work well with cross-functional teams. And that's why, because the matrix organization is the typical organization that we see business analysts working in. And what that means is when a project is across different departments, right? So you have a project that has an impact for accounting, for marketing, for product, right? You will have these staff down here, they'll be from different functional areas. And for that one project only, they will be working with the business analyst / project manager on that project, because they bring the functional business requirements to the business analyst. Meaning, let's say if this is marketing, this staff person will bring marketing requirements for our project. This is accounting. This staff person will bring accounting requirements to the business analyst. And let's say if this is product, they'll bring the product requirements. So these people, even though they report to a different functional manager for a particular project, they will be working with the project manager / business analyst on implementing and documenting this project. Does that make sense?
Hey, Sarvjit, I have one question.
Yeah.
What could be the possible questions from the functional manager to the business analyst? Like, if say if something is not going to deliverable from the business analyst, so what could be the questions which comes from the functional organization structure to the business analyst?
I don't think I understand your question.
Something which is not going to deliverable from the technical team, and
Yeah,
technical team basically which reports to the respective project managers, and though business analyst is going to work with project managers, right?
yeah.
So functionally, executive level and the leadership level, what kind of questions could be asked to the business analyst, like what is not deliverable kind of things, and what is not going to deliverable?
So that question would be answered by the project manager, because it's not the business analyst's responsibility to make sure the project is on track. The responsibility of the business analyst is to make sure the project is documented, all the requirements are gathered. What you're talking about is more of an execution phase where the project manager is overseeing the development of the project now. The BA is involved and will know what things are not functioning the way they're supposed to be according to the requirements that were written, and the use cases, et cetera, that were created based on the business logic or business rules. So they can let the project manager know that functionality is not where it needs to be, or it's not functioning properly, but it's the project manager's then responsibility to talk to the development team's management to understand why there's delays, if there's any roadblocks, but it's not the business analyst's responsibility.
Okay. So one final question: who will validate whether the requirements, business requirements, is on track or it's not on track?
business analyst.
And the project manager, because then you're going to have a project schedule that in X date, let's say at the end of April 30th, we will have this functionality ready and delivered. Everyone's in agreement. And now what you're doing is you're treading on the line of waterfall and agile, right? Because we know deadlines. Validation comes from QA and the QA teams and the business teams. Development needs to finish on a certain date that we've identified. Then it goes into QA for testing, regression testing, and then the business unit will come back and validate if the development was done in accordance to how the documents or the requirements were written. And again, the project manager should be involved through these, but it falls onto the BA's shoulders to report up of if functionality is not working properly and to alert and flag concerns to the project manager. So the project manager could then take the concerns to the executive team leaders.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Was that?
Yep. Understood.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions on the organization structure? Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so typically this is on the waterfall environment. Typically the roles that you'll see on a project team include a project manager, business analyst, business stakeholders, a technical architect, your programmers or developers, your DBAs, your UX designers, and quality assurance, which is our QA folks that help us test, okay? So this is the diagram for waterfall that we see typically. There's 6 different phases. Depending on, the diagrams you'll sometimes see 5 to 6 different phases. The first one is planning, analysis, design, implementation, testing and integration, and maintenance. So these are typically the different phases that we see in the waterfall environment. With Agile, it's a little different, but if you understand the waterfall environment, you'll have a very easy time transitioning into Agile. But if you're jumping into Agile head first, I find that there's lots of confusion for people because they just don't get the framework. And the framework is from the waterfall environment is a lot more solid based on how things are done. So again, this is the waterfall methodology. Agile is different. And the rest of the training for roles and responsibility will focus on the waterfall environment again, because it makes, if you understand the waterfall, it'll be easy for you to transition into agile. So with that, roles and responsibilities of a business analyst, there's different things that you'll be doing based on where you are in your project. So let's say, for example, if you're in the planning phase, what you'll be doing, is identifying your stakeholders. Typically, when you start a project, you'll be given a list of departments or list of stakeholders. But when I say identify stakeholders, that means additional stakeholders that have not been identified yet, right? You want to make sure that you identify all stakeholders before you begin, because adding new stakeholders mean additional functionality or additional requirements, and it gets complicated if those stakeholders are not identified at the beginning of a project. The second thing that you'll be doing is you'll be documenting the high-level scope. Lots of times as a business analyst, you're given high-level scope, but in the event that you're not given like a proper write-up of what the high-level scope of the project is, then it's your responsibility to document that and get that validated by your PM or the project sponsor. And that's important because you need to understand the scope of the project, okay? If you're in the requirements phase, what you'll be doing as a business analyst, you'll be scheduling meetings with their stakeholders. You'll be trying to identify and document as is and to be processes and requirements, and you'll be gathering requirements in the requirements phase. In the design phase, you'll be creating prototypes, mockups, or interface layouts. Lots of times, if you have UX designers on the team, they'll be doing that. If you don't, and you don't have a great background in creating mockups, you just want to do maybe high level, low fidelity mockups or things like that. So your business stakeholders can validate what the system may look and feel like. You'll be outlining your, testing strategy, and you'll be creating a change management plan in the design phase. In the testing phase, you'll be manually testing the functionality based on the requirements. You're going to be supporting UAT testing, and you're going to be creating the training materials that your stakeholders will need. Again, if you have a team, if your company has a training department, they will typically create this documentation. But in the things that I've supported, most of the time, I'm the one creating, taking screenshots and, writing a blurb or two on what needs to happen on that screen. And then in the implementation phase, this is where you'll be delivering the training to your stakeholders, and you'll be supporting and guiding them as we roll the project, as we cut the project over. So these are roles and responsibilities. And again, based on the phase of the project that you're in, they'll be different, right? And if you're working on 2 or 3 different projects, you'll be doing different things based on where your project is, what phase the project is in, okay? The next role, these are the artifacts or deliverables that you're responsible as a business analyst, right? So in the planning phase, you're going to be doing a project charter or statement of work. Again, as I said, oftentimes you're given these documents, the project charter and statement of work, but in the event that there is not, it is your responsibility as a BA to create one. And then in the planning phase, I've written down requirements management plan. That's typically something that a PM and a BA would work on together. And what a requirements management plan is, it documents how you're going to be documenting the requirements, right? So are you going to it just talks about, the how of gathering requirements, meaning, are you going to be meeting with stakeholders on one-on-one interviews? Are you going to be meeting with stakeholders in a group session? Are you going to, so it just talks about your approach on documenting the requirements for that project. And typically, these things, the requirements management plan doesn't change from project to project, right? Because your approach on gathering requirements, if it's, at a company level, typically is standard based on what you've done in the past. If you're in the requirements phase, you should be documenting the business requirements document. Sorry, this is a little sticky, my laptop. So in the requirements phase, you should be doing your BRD. You should be working on your business process documents, which are the as-is and to-be, which also go into the business requirement document. And you should be working on your functional requirements document. In the design phase, you're going to be completing your requirements traceability. You're going to be creating a change management plan and a test plan. And in the testing phase, you'll be executing UAT. You'll be creating manuals and guides, which is, again, the training that we talked about. And you'll be creating the training for the end users. And when we implement, you as a business analyst will be documenting lessons learned. Any questions on these things? Okay. So with that, I'll hand it over to G to talk about some of the tools that business analysts use.
Right. So as we just covered, BAs are going to be involved in various levels of the project, whether it comes to documenting, validation, UAT. So some of the tools that the BAs are typically required to know and use are obviously Word. Excel is going to be your biggest friend for documentation, creating all types of scope documents. And we'll go through a few examples of those as well. Another tool that teams use is Excel to create high-level timelines. When BAs and project managers work together, they like to create a high-level timeline of how complex the project is, how long it'll take to do the requirement phase, discovery phase, how long it'll take to do the as-is document, create flow diagrams, etc. So a lot of that work can be done in Excel. And if your company or organization is really small, these two might be the only tools that they have. So another thing for a BA is they have to be willing to adapt to their environment and use whatever tools they can get their hands on. They have to be very adaptive. So a lot of the work can be done in Word or Excel alone. If you're with a larger organization and they have access to different tools, such as Vsts, Jira, some companies are starting to use Trello, Asana, and etc. The reason why a lot of these companies are using these tools now is because they're on the cloud, meaning they can be accessed from anywhere, whether you're home or you're on the road. It's all in the cloud. We're not saving stuff on our laptop. God forbid the laptop gets stolen or your hard drive crashes. Everything's in the cloud and it's always there for access. So those are some of the tools that you'll see as an analyst being used in different organizations. When it comes to diagramming, companies will use Visio a lot. And when I say diagramming, I'm talking about flow diagrams, business logic diagrams, swim lanes, etc. So a lot of the diagramming happens in Visio. Now, if their company doesn't have Visio, they might have licenses to other tools like Draw.io. We've demonstrated how to use that a lot in our sessions. Companies use Listed Chart, Glyphy, and there's tons of free tools out there, online tools out there that companies will use depending on what kind of budget they have and the size of the organization. And then when we get into QA, UAT, and bug reporting, again, Excel can be used, Word can be used, and some of the tools that I already mentioned, Vsts, if you folks know what that is, it's the newer version of TFS. There's Jira, Trello, and the list goes on and on. Companies will use different tools, but they all pretty much work the same. The format will be different. How they look will be different. Things might be called a little bit different, but essentially they all do the same thing. Confluence in the chart is Jira related. It's a good tool. It's great for bug tracking, issue tracking, but we're going to focus primarily on the BA side of things of entering use cases, user stories, and this comes into the Jira side. The Agile side. So a lot of these tools are used in the Agile environment. In the waterfall methodology, you do all your documentation up front and you lock it in. Once your document is locked in, meaning signed off by all the stakeholders, the stakeholders, when they sign off on a document or your requirements, you do not go back and change those requirements. there's only the next phase happens after the requirement, then there's the design and so forth. So you don't go back and change the requirements. So those are easily written in Word document. There's a sign-off process, and that's it. You don't touch those requirements. When you start using these tools, that's for agile world where requirements can change. They're allowed to change. You can manipulate them. And if you find out there's something wrong with the requirement or it doesn't meet the business need, you can go back and change it really quick and keep ongoing documentation for it. And all the documentation that's done for these requirements, or in agile world, when they're called user stories, they're within that ticket. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Now, moving on to wireframing and prototyping. Again, companies use Visio. I've done wireframing in PowerPoint. I've done it in Visio, and then I've done it in tools that were built just for wireframing. So there's InDesign, there's Azure, which is a prototyping tool, interactive prototyping tool. So as your knowledge base expands and as you go to different companies that use different tools, you'll start understanding what tool, what's better than the other, and you'll quickly develop a preference for one over the other. Next slide, please.
It doesn't move when I want it to move. Okay.
Okay. So for here, so now on your right-hand side, this is a BRM example, a business requirement matrix. So what typically BAs, and this is a good practice to have early on, so you understand the importance of your requirement and functions and features. When you start writing your requirement and you start documenting everything, it will help you tremendously and your stakeholders to understand the value that this function or feature brings to the business. Is this functionality mandatory? Is it desirable? Is it a nice to have? Is it a want? So, and is it a future state? Maybe we documented something and you know what? It's not mandatory. It's a nice to have. Maybe we can put it in place in the future. And then a lot of requirements that are discussed are no longer needed. So instead of just removing it from your documentation and forgetting about it, you want to notate it that with an N where it was discussed but no longer required. So once you start putting together your documentation, the next step is to typically, it's a good idea to put together a business requirement matrix and put comments in it, because as these projects go on, they might be very short projects or they might be very long projects, and it's hard to remember everything that was discussed, and it's even harder to go back and look up all the emails. Sometimes these discussions happen in a room, and once everyone leaves, they forget. So keeping this documentation as an analyst, it will make your life a lot easier, and you'll become very valuable to the company because you have a record, a source of truth of the discussions that were had. And we can look back 6 months ago and figure out why we made this decision. So that will be helpful. This can be easily done in a Word document. And then you can use from business requirements, go into the matrix, and then you can use them to create test cases and then so forth. And you can keep using them and you can input it into a traceability matrix, etc. So all that can be easily done in Word. Next slide. So VSTS, it's a Microsoft tool. I've used this a lot in the past. It's primarily a lot of agile teams use it. The beauty of this is you can create epics, you can create features, and you can create requirements. You'll be able to put together a backlog where you can pull requirements from for your current sprint. This is all agile world. And in here, you can open up a particular requirement. You can enter a description, which is the user story. You can enter a acceptance criteria, which you see on the screen, and then you can put it and you can start planning within this module of which plan or which sprint we're going to work on this, you can assign this to a developer. Let's say you have a particular developer in mind that's on your team that's going to work on this requirement. You can assign that here. You can assign the priorities of it too. We need to do this first before we do other things. And then also, as I mentioned, a BRM, which was a separate document in Word, you can keep your discussion notes within this requirement document. So for each requirement, if we made a decision, if I had the tool, I would scroll down and show you, but you'll see it at the bottom left-hand corner. It says discussion. You can actually put your meeting notes in there and have it as a reminder of what this is going to do down the line. Next slide. So now for diagramming, this was done in Visio. It's a very high level of when an issue is created, how are we going to report it? So it's good to put these processes in documentation and memorialize them. Your company already has a process. Everyone knows the process. Is it documented anywhere? And do you know it well enough? It's great to show these kind of documents to your clients. So if you have a new client coming on board, you want to show them what your process looks like. Again, this can be done in Visio or any of the tools that we have listed on the screen. Back in the day, before I got really good at diagramming on a computer, I used to do it on a piece of paper just so I had clarity. And then I would put it in Visio and make it nice and pretty, add colors, add text, and so forth. But you want to keep it very simple, concise, and easy to follow. And then for wireframing, again, we've shown you multiple tools. We did a session on UI UX. I used PowerPoint to do those screens. So again, you can use Visio, PowerPoint, and any one of these tools that we have listed. A lot of these tools, if you go onto their website, they have a lot of demos, free trials, and user manuals for you to read through and get an understanding of how these tools work. So you're already comfortable using some of these tools when you get to that position and the company is using one tool versus another tool. Reading user manuals for these, one, will give you an understanding of the tool, and two, will give you an understanding of how user manuals need to be created when you create a user manual as a business analyst. User manuals are something that comes at the end where you want to give the end user a high-level understanding of how to use the tool that you developed. The business analyst has a big part of creating that because they are the closest one to those requirements. They understand how the tool is going to work or the feature is going to work. So they will have a lot of input on how this user manual is created. So it'll also give you an understanding of what a user manual should look like and what are the things that you should provide screenshots for and how to lay it out. So it'll be a dual benefit for you to read user manuals. You'll understand the tools and you'll also understand how to create user manuals.
Okay, guys, questions? No questions? How's that possible? So, okay, we have 10 minutes left. Feedback on the training, and maybe let's talk about what we want to talk about next week. Any feedback on suggestions for topics for next week?
Good evening, Sarah Jade. Good evening, Jade. I have a question.
Yes.
I wanted to find out how complicated must a use case diagram be? Because I tried drawing one, but I've got my lines crossing all over the place. And I had so many use cases and the lines were just crossing over. How complicated can it be at some point? Or is it best?
Are you talking about a use case or a flow diagram?
A use case diagram.
So,
and you had lines crossing over?
Yes, like the association.
So, right, and what you want to remember is sometimes there's complex pieces to a a flow diagram, you should always break out the pieces, and then you can always connect it. So when we went over the topic of how to create a flow diagram, you always have a start and end point. You can always continue that end point or start that flow on a separate page. So let's say you want to just focus on logging into an application. You can put that flow, just that flow, and then call out an association on 3 pages later of this is where that flow picks up again. So you don't have to cram everything into one page and draw lines over it so no one understands it. Think of a larger picture. That's why if you ever go into a diagramming tool, as you start working, that your workspace grows also. Have you ever noticed it's not just one page and you have to cram everything in? Because these tools understand that it's a complex web of things connecting and things happening. So you should always try to keep things limited to a page, and then you can call out connectors that this flow will be picked up on this page or the next page and so forth. So try to avoid drawing over lines, because as if I would read that, then that to me, I understand it as that's a cross point. Something can happen here. So you always want to keep it very clear and concise. And there's so much information out on the web of just examples that once you start looking at them, you'll start understanding how to lay out information. And sometimes we tend to put a lot of information into our flow diagrams. It's not required, because some of these things are understood already. You can set preconditions. You can write something before you show your diagram to set parameters around what you're displaying. So try to not cram everything into a flow diagram, because at the end of the day, it's just a logical flow of what the system or a user is trying to do.
Okay.
And then,
and if you want to share an example with us, we can work through that together.
yeah, and then try to understand the goal of doing these flow diagrams is to make sure that you understand and you can get validation from the business, right? So as Jeet said, you don't necessarily, if it's a standard login process, you don't necessarily have to create a process flow around it, right? Or use case around it, because everybody understands, you validate and all that fun stuff. But the goal, excuse me, of creating these diagrams is that you and the business can validate your understanding of the requirements. So you can go ahead and document them in a BRD or in user stories if you're in the agile environment. So it's just to make sure that you have a firm understanding of the requirements.
Okay, so am I right in saying, even though it's said to draw a use case diagram for the whole system, I could just make it as simplified as possible and then break the individual use cases onto separate sheets as opposed to putting everything all together? Okay.
Yes.
Of course, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and what tool are you using to do this?
I'm using Visio, and I found I was dragging things all over the place. Everything was moving and I got frustrated in the end. And I think what you said about it being big, it makes it more complicated, and the system knows that it's a complex system.
Right.
That's
and what you should typically do to not drive yourself crazy in the future is put down your process first before you draw lines. Because once you start connecting lines in Visio, when you move that process, the lines move with it. Keep the lines for the end. Put down your process, figure out what you're doing, and on the left-hand side where you can pick your modules, there's one particular one in there for a connector. A connector usually means you're going to stop this process here and pick it up elsewhere. So look for that. And you can always go to the help screen and it has all that functionality labeled in there as well. So always save the lines for the last, because it'll make your life a lot easier.
And do the lines have to be straight, or can they be curved or go with corners on them?
Yeah, you can, any way you want to lay it out, but you want to remain consistent. If you're using corners, use corners everywhere. If you're making them straight, make them straight. If you're going to do curves, make them all curved.
Okay.
Obviously, unless they're going straight, but you want consistency, because when somebody sees 3 different types of lines, their first understanding is these lines mean different things, right? So
Yeah.
as an analyst, you want to keep that in mind of how is somebody else, without speaking, going to understand what you're presenting.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we have a request for talking about one of the slides. Let me just go back to my PowerPoint. So, one second. Is your question around this slide, Ashwini?
Yes, that is correct. So essentially, what I'm trying to understand is I stranded one of the situation where, you know, we are trying to put across some optimal solution, etc. However, all the time I'm getting answers from the dev team that this is not possible because they don't have, for example, they don't have data services available that can't be done in the UI, presentation layer, etc., etc. However, that is, you know, those kind of features are working in the as-is situation. So now when we're moving from as-is to 2B, it should be more optimal, right? So
Yeah.
that's the reason I wanted to understand how these three tier integrates and talk to each other, and that would be helpful for me. Thank you.
So if those things are working in as is, it could be that, for example, let's say at the base of everything now, you guys are hearing a lot more about data analysts, right? And the reason for that is lots of times, you know, data was not being considered as much as it needs to be. So Ashwini, if you're saying that these things are working in the as is, there could be a reason where a database maybe is not supported, or it needs to be migrated, or something needs to happen for that data, if it's showing up today, for us to make it show in the future state functionality, right? So I would try to understand what those limitations are from your dev teams before, because I can only give you a generic answer on why this may not work, but it may be worthwhile for you to work with your dev teams and understand why, if something is working in the as-is scenario, why it wouldn't work in the 2B. So I can just give you a general example, but I don't know if that would help you too much.
No, effectively, I'm looking for the general answer because I'm not sure if I could be, you know, put across the real life situation because of the etc. But definitely, how deal with, you know, such kind of situations, right? How deep we can go into those kind of, you know, topics, because that also, you know, create some kind of challenges in order to, you know, to focus on the requirements, right? So ultimately I land up in a situation where I agree what they say because of my limited understanding on the technology side, on the upstream side. Therefore, you know, it doesn't work. So that's the problem I'm trying to solve. So definitely generic answer would be helpful.
Okay, so generic answer, let's think about Amazon and how this would apply to the Amazon world of things, right? So when we, let's say if you are I buy Amazon as my best friend, right? I have kids, so anytime I need to, I'm running out of stuff, I go to Amazon and I order that. So from a consumer standpoint, the things that are available, let's say if I'm looking for a toy for my 3-year-old, when I'm putting in the search bar, toys for toddlers or toys for whatever, I'm interacting only at the presentation layer, right? I don't see or need to understand the logical or the database layers because I don't care. From a consumer standpoint, I'm only interacting at the presentation layer. But when I put those search terms in, toys for 3-year-old boys, right? That's where they're calculating on the back end, and they're doing the calculations and things that they need to pull information from the database layer, right? So this is where all the logic happens, is typically in this middle tier, right? And everything that is associated. So I don't sell on Amazon. Maybe I should create an account just to see what it looks like, because we talk about Amazon a lot in our trainings because it's a model that everybody understands. But maybe 80% sure or 90% sure when sellers on Amazon are loading their products, they're probably tagging them somehow, right? They're probably tagging them for toys, or toys for this age range, or toys for educational, or just whatever the scenario may be. And that's why when they're tagging them at the database layer, the logical layer is able to call them when a search is being done at the presentation layer, right? But let's say in your scenario, if your dev teams are saying, hey, Ashwini, this was happening before, but we're not able to connect to the APIs. When they're talking about APIs, they're talking about integration points to different systems, right? So in this diagram, again, it's a very, very simple diagram. We're just talking about databases, but there could be other end-tier diagrams where they're wanting to get some sort of data to come into the presentation layer by doing APIs, connecting to those APIs of different systems so they can return through the logical layer and then into the presentation layer some of that data. Does that help?
Yes, that definitely helps. Yes. So I think I need to focus on things like whether those data to attributes are available, etc. or not.
Yeah.
Are there? Yep.
Yep. And your role as a business analyst, if you don't understand something, go ask them, right? Tell them to sit you down and draw out why this is not possible, because that's a responsibility to the business, because the business will want to know, hey, Ashwini, you're enhancing my system, you're making it better. How come I can't do the things that I was doing before? So you need to have those firm answers and you need to understand those. So go back to them and say, help me understand in layman terms why this is not possible.
True, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. And sorry we missed your chat because sometimes.
No, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. Really appreciate it.
Are there any more questions for this training today? And I saw some requests for the next training, so we'll look at those and we'll prioritize. But I think that there are others. Okay, different companies. Okay, different companies use different tools. Is it? It's been a challenge when I attend interview because I know one tool and the expectation is different. To know all tools? No, the expectation is not to know all tools, right? If you know diagramming tools and they say the requirement is for you to know Visio, as long as you worked in any diagramming tool, you should be able to pick it up really, really quickly, right? And if they're mentioning a tool that you don't know, my standard response during interviews is, no, I haven't worked with that, but I'm a fast learner and I'm sure I'll pick it up really quick. And joke around with them and say, YouTube is my best friend or Google is my best friend. So make sure, just say that you will have no problems learning a tool that they're using at all. So, just throw a little humor in there, but it is, you're right. Different companies use different tools. So as long as you know diagramming tools, as long as you know some sort of some generic, and if you are, going into as Jeet mentioned a little bit earlier, all of these tools that are online at least have free trials. So if you're looking at the job description, they'll typically list what tools they use. Go Google them, watch YouTube videos, and then sign up for their trial versions, which will be limited functionality. You guys don't expect to walk into an organization and find the same caliber of that tool as in your free trial, but at least you can kind of find your way around it. So that's what I would suggest. If you have not experienced with a tool, go find it online, find YouTube videos, and kind of be prepared to talk about that tool a little bit.
Yeah, and also just to add, a great way to answer that question is just everything that was mentioned. If you know what tool they're talking about and you have used another tool in the past, draw comparisons to it. So if they're saying, oh, do you know how to use Visio, and you haven't, and you've used a different tool, you can draw comparisons because, again, you have to do your research beforehand before you walk into that interview, and you have to be confident in what you're saying. As long as you know the understanding of how to diagram or how to use that tool, you can always draw comparisons to other tools. I use certain tools that other companies or other people don't like using. And then you can always draw comparisons that, oh, they do the similar things, but I like this one more because X, Y, Z. So that not only shows them that you're well-versed in multiple tools, and then it also shows them that you can bring insight for trying different tools or different things as well.
Okay. Anything else? We're over time. Yes. Is there another question?
Yes, one final question. I wanted to find out, would you ever look at gathering requirements for a CRM system? For example, like Salesforce?
Yes. Why wouldn't you? Because here's why I say that. Because even though Salesforce is a standard CRM tool, your requirements for your company, right, will be a little different than what everybody else is using for. So, excuse me, when you're looking to purchase a tool like CRM or anything that's off the shelf, you still need to do some sort of configuration, right, for that tool to internalize it with your current processes for the company. So you will, yes, definitely still need to gather some requirements, right? Not the generic requirements of the CRM needs to capture name, phone number, and things like that. Those are known as standard functionality, right? Okay. But you also need to figure out what your company, how your company is using these CRM tools, and then configure based on that.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that helps. What you should do if you're doing that, if you're only looking at CRM, if Salesforce has been decided that as a company you guys are going to buy that software, I would look at their feature list and work with their stakeholders and document things that are not included in the standard feature list, or maybe how the workflows need to be different. So maybe instead of once you capture the contact information for the customer, instead of routing it to I don't know, sales or product or whatever, it needs to go to maybe some other different department. So I would look at doing those things so you're not wasting a lot of your time with standard functionality.
Okay, the reason why I asked was because I see a lot of jobs that are saying, some jobs saying you must have Salesforce experience and you must be able to gather requirements within the Salesforce environment.
So,
and
yeah. So I would just say that as long as you guys can meet 70% of the requirements that are listed, still go for that interview, still apply, right? Because it's really difficult to find somebody that meets 100% of the requirements. And as women, I see a lot of women doing this a lot, that we want to make sure, for us to be comfortable, we want to make sure that we meet 100% of the requirements, and that's never the case, right? Unless you've been working at the company, you're not going to know all the details and meet all those requirements. So as long as you can meet, I would say 70% of the requirements listed in the job description, go for it.
Okay.
Because lots of times during interviews, they're trying to make sure that you're the right personality fit for the company a lot of times, right? Yes, understanding, having a framework and documenting requirements is important, but if they like you as a person, they see you're a go-getter, and you have experience as a business analyst, they will bring you on.
Okay, it's just...
Go ahead.
No, go on. What was the question?
It was just that I was worried that I didn't have enough product knowledge of Salesforce.
YouTube will be your best friend for the next couple of days, I assume.
Okay.
Right, and you're not a Salesforce specialist. So if a company is expecting you to come in as a Salesforce specialist, that's wrong on the company's part, because Salesforce specialists have to go through a certification process to be certified in Salesforce. That's not what they're looking for. So don't expect yourself to know all the ins and outs of it. Again, YouTube, Google, there's so much information out there. They have free training programs. Microsoft has free training programs. Guys, there's so much free training out there. Microsoft Azure has free training programs on their website, and you can take their training. It's hours and hours of training. So if you want to learn about the cloud migration, Azure, It has so much free training on their website. You don't have to pay for anything. And guys, don't be afraid to apply to a job. The first step is just applying. Apply. And then if you get a call back, and this a lot has to do with how your resume is prepared, when you get a call back, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're not going to get the job. So what? You just got so much experience out of that interview process that you can use it for your next interview. I apply to stuff that I know I won't get when I used to apply to jobs, but I always took it that if I get 10 interviews, I can always go for them, understand what I don't know. Every time you go to an interview and don't get a job, you walk away with knowing, man, I did a bad job on this, I did a bad job on that, and then you can prepare yourself. So consider it as a trial run as you're preparing, and then when you have that job that you really want to go after, you'll be 100% prepared. So don't be afraid to apply just because you don't meet 100% of their requirements. And a lot of companies now, and I can tell you as a fact that a lot of companies now are, the last check in an interview is your personality. You might know everything that they're looking for, but if you have a bad personality, they will not hire you, because nowadays companies are understanding that company morale and their culture is more important than somebody that knows all the tools. So don't be afraid to apply.
And when Jeet says bad personality, he means that you need to be able to work well with others, right? As we showed you in the diagrams, most business analysts are working in a matrix environment with cross-functional teams. That means that you will be working with many, many different departments. So you need to have the ability to work well with people and brush up on those interpersonal skills, and I think we did a session earlier on how to effectively gather requirements. So that should be in our group as well, if you guys want to go back and take a look at that.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, guys, if there are no more questions, it's a wrap for today. We have some suggestions in the chat area for topics for next week. And then we'll also, this again is live in the groups for you guys to go back and review. And if you have any questions after the fact, please feel free to post them. And then if there's other topics that you'd like to learn about, let us know, and we'll be happy to cover those as well. All right, so with that, have a great rest of your weekend, whatever that may be, like a couple of hours or a whole day. And with that, I'll see you guys again next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.